Today's video is going to be focused on my tips on doing research on your own, doing online research, sharing my techniques of web-foo. I consider myself somewhat of a lay scholar, I guess. Basically, I kind of research these things on my own and try to learn as much as I can about a particular topic. I love history in many, many forms. This particular video is going to be focused on history around cultural traditions, folk traditions, New Age practices, and Reconstruction neo-paganism, which is a lot of the videos that I have on my channel are focused around that since people seem to like that a lot. One of the things that I started doing, I guess in 95, so about 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, is I started getting into some of this New Age type of neo-paganism. And I've shared this story before, so I won't go into great detail, but needless to say, I went to like psychic conventions and I spoke with local folks that were also practitioners. And I started buying books. I bought books through Llewellyn Publications. I bought them on Azure Green's website. I went to local occult shops and I started reading. I found a lot of them printed very similar and almost the same information. It wasn't bad information, but I never knew where it originally came from. So I spent years thinking, oh, this stuff has to be right. I never stopped to ask where this information came from, or if it's authentic or real, or if someone just made it up. As I got older, I started wondering what made the people who created whatever religion, spirituality, or practice so special. How did they discover this? How do we know it's true? I looked at stuff like Reiki. Okay, I like healing. I've been huge into healing, etheric touch, quantum vibrational healing, theta healing, and I've learned different techniques by going to schools or colleges that are kind of accredited school, not really accredited school, like official education, kind of like, you know, you go get a certificate and you learn their method, but it's at least through a group that teaches you. I asked myself, how did this original doctor who created Reiki, how did he get initiated? How did he get the attunements done? Because you had originally had to pay thousands of dollars for the 3 levels of attunement to become the master teacher level of Reiki. And this got me thinking about other religions and spirituality. How do people of any religion, take Christianity for example, how did they get the original word from God? How did they get this communication from this divine source? So this made me want to start going down and looking at original sources. I started talking to folks online through different types of social media like TikTok, and I had one conversation with someone, and they asked me based upon what, where was that source? And they shared sources to back up their point. This started a trip maybe about, 3 years ago that I've just been down this rabbit hole of where did it originally come from? And with today's internet, it's easier to find sources. Back in the 80s and 90s, you kind of just, again, got whatever books you can. And if you want to know what books I have, I'm constantly adding. I'm trying to get more historical and reputable sources in my library, but I do have like a walkthrough of where my library was if you want to check that out. So that's one aspect is read, research, look into things. But as you're doing that, one of the things that I'm finding now, especially when I'm like, where did I read that or where did I look that up? I don't want to get stuck in the trap of repeating hearsay that might not even be accurate or authentic. So take notes. That's the big thing, is take notes. I mean, even in some of the modern neo-pagan paths, such as Wicca, they mention stuff like a Book of Shadows, which is a magical journal. Take notes, cite your sources, so you can go back and check it out later, or if you talk to others, you can talk to them about it. One of the things that I've been doing lately is I have a OneNote, and I create a whole bunch of sections with a ton of subsections, and all of these subsections have links out to PDF versions of the books, articles that I'm reading, YouTube videos that I watched around it. Sometimes there's screenshots, sometimes there's things that I wrote out, or I write out my own notes, or I do a copy-paste with the reference to where it came from, and it gives me additional stuff to search and research later, but also allows me to have intelligent conversations with others about these topics and then back it up with a source saying, this is where I found it, versus just saying, I think I remember this at one time. No. This is what it is based upon this. We learn it from somewhere. Let's find out where that is. That's the point of this video, is to help empower you to do the same thing and to show you when I have these conversations in my videos, the type of process I'm going through. So aside from taking notes, whether it be digital or physical or whatever the case may be, another option aside from reading the books, and sometimes I'll do the horrible thing of highlighting in my books, but I don't like that because if you ever want to change the highlight, you can't. And if you ever decide to sell the book or share it with someone else, then it has all this markups throughout the book. I don't like defacing books. I used to once upon a time. I don't do it anymore. Instead, I've actually been buying digital copies of some of the books that I have on Kindle. And Kindle's nice because then I can read it on an internet website and I can pull it up for videos, or I can also check it out on my Kindle readers and stuff, and I can do little highlight notes, and they're all digital, and then I can jump around to my notes and find what I was looking for a lot easier. So I'm actually really getting into doing that as well. So the question is then, how do you know which books and which authors and whatnot? That's hard. That can't really be answered in a single video, but I am going to suggest to you a few sites that I use when I'm starting my research to go down a rabbit hole, and then a couple figures that I feel like are reputable figures that I would recommend you check out if you want to get more information. So let's talk about some of the websites that I use when I start my little rabbit hole journey. These are in no particular order, but I am going to start with two websites that are going to make you want to turn off the video as soon as you hear what they're called, but hear me out. Let me explain why I'm using these and why they're good as part of the journey. Not an end-all be-all, but part of the journey. I also will mention really quick before I pull up these sites, almost all these example sites are going to have either Francis Barrett or the Magus on there, because currently right now I'm reading the Magus on Kindle. I also have a physical copy of the book as well in my library, my short little book collection that I'm calling a library. And the reason for that is a lot of the New Age occult practices that people are doing seems to be based around the Magus, as well as older books like the Sworn Book of Honorius. Now, the Sworn Book of Honorius, I actually have a physical copy that I'm getting in the mail, and I've recently bought it on Kindle because apparently that's even older than this. In fact, checking my notes, because again, it's important to check notes and where things come from. The Magus Volume 1 was written in 1801 by Francis Barrett, and then the Sworn Book of Honorius, I always say that wrong, Sworn Book of Honorius was written in the 13th century. So 1200s. So that's a little bit older. So I'm going to kind of go back in time. I also have a copy of the Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage from 1932 was when the copy was printed. The original was apparently from 1450. So that's another book that I can check out as well. So I've got a lot of different things to kind of read through and look at, and I'm taking my time. But I'm kind of painting this picture backwards. Now, part of this picture painting backwards is I tried to look up through these means to look at rare magical books, who wrote them, where they come from, and then compare them to some of the modern books. That's part of this journey is like, okay, well, where could these sources have originated from, to start looking at these different sources. And then a couple of the sources that I'm going to share as far as people I think are reputable have done videos around this and suggest these books that are already on my list. And I'm like, additional confirmation. And that's what you're looking for. You're looking for multiple different sources that are saying similar the same thing, and then asking yourself how reputable the sources are before you go forward in your journey. So the sites. The first one is Wikipedia. People instantly think Wikipedia and they're like, oh no, that's a terrible source. Let me explain. Wikipedia, like the next one, which is WikiWand, is basically discredited by many and said it's not a reputable source because anybody can write on here and it can be anything and you don't know if it's true. Yes, but both of them also require you to cite your sources. So use this as a jumping off point. Not an end-all be-all, but a spot to start. If you know what to look up, what words to look for, you can kind of scroll through here and it actually shows you the resource of that, what they use to cite this. It's a cited source. So go to that source and then confirm if that source is reputable. So use this as a spot to begin and see if the source is reputable. If it's not, okay, fine, dismiss the information. But if it is a reputable source, now you have a reputable source from a spot that's easily accessible with information together. Actually, a lot of these underlines here will have additional information, so it takes you either to other wiki pages or it takes you to external sites. Usually the number stuff, and you can scroll all the way down here at the bottom. So here's the sources for most of the stuff. The question is, are these sources reputable? Something to think about. Same thing over here on WikiWand. Again, Francis Barrett, because I'm reading that book right now, and you can scroll down through here as well. And there is going to be very similar information. There's going to be additional articles. Again, check out where these articles are going to, and if you trust those articles, then at the very bottom here, references, sources, and external links. And in some cases, you'll find similar ones. This Francis King, the Flying Sorcerer, Oxford Mandrake 1992. I think that's the same one. It's the exact same one over here on Wikipedia. So they're going to have very, very similar ones. Like I said, WikiWand is going to be basically the same thing as Wikipedia. It's just going to be more occult focused. So I do use these two sites. They're not my first go-tos, but I do use them. Another one I like to use is Britannica. Britannica.com. I'll type in a word or topic, and then I'll kind of read through here and see what it says. Now, specifically with Magus, it's just giving kind of a little bit of the history of what the word Magus is and where it came from, and it gives you an article. This is, the Encyclopedia Britannica. Back in the day when I was doing research as a kid, my grandfather owned an encyclopedia, and he said, you want to look something up? Grab one of the volumes, look it up. So I did a lot of my research paper from the Encyclopedia Britannica. They, to me, are a reputable source. Now, people might argue if they don't practice polytheism and paganism and stuff like that, then how will they know? And it's going to be a skewed point of view. Yes, but they take out the preference and they focus more on the historical aspect. So even if it's not 100% right to the letter of someone who practices, it's at least verifiable resources. So again, Britannica I use a lot for a lot of, even my most recent videos I've referenced Britannica a lot, and that's why. Look up a word or a topic or a subject, and this again can give you a jumping off point. None of these are end all be alls. These are things to begin your search. The next one is Etymon Online. Yeah, so it's Etymology Online basically, but it's Etymon. It's really weird how the link URL is. Anyway, regardless, it's similar. You look up a certain topic or subject. For example, I had Francis Barrett in there, but let me type Magus instead, sticking with the theme. And if I go here for the Magus or Magi, and if you go there, it'll talk about history and origin. Now, I've done videos recently talking about topics and subjects like the etymology behind the word witch and how it comes from Old English witcha, right? So if we take witch instead, and I talked about this in one video. One person actually said that etymology is not a very accurate site and that it kind of just pulls together some other dictionary definitions, and there's some older places to go outside of this. The more I looked into this, yeah, that's actually accurate. So this is kind of an iffy kind of site. It's kind of, in my opinion, around Wikipedia, where it's kind of like the information there is not completely to be dismissed out of hand, but it gives you a jumping off point, and it's something to look at and consider. When you see stuff and you see this written, try to verify it elsewhere. This is on etymology for a reason. Why is it here? How accurate it is? And then, try to look up stuff like, well, what was the oldest source of the word? When was it originally written? Do you have, so if this is from Old English, right? Old English, and it looks like Wicca, but apparently it's pronounced Witcha. You can look up the pronunciation of Old English words in order to understand how to properly pronounce that, but then go look up an Old English dictionary. See if that word is in there. So try to get additional confirmation, and again, see if multiple sources are kind of swarming in on the same thing. The next one is part of the whole getting resources, right? Physically reading the books, getting Kindle versions of the books. Sometimes you can find copies of the books on Internet Archive, which I've also shared in my videos before, because it gives you a physical look through. So this is the Magus, the book that I'm currently reading by Francis Barrett. This one was published in 1975. And then you have additional information below, but then you can kind of thumb through, you can zoom in, you can read different parts of the book. And again, this one's limited because you have to log in to borrow this. I don't need to borrow it because, like I said, I have it on both Kindle and I also have the physical copy of the book. So I'm just reading it that way. But you can find other books on Internet Archive or other sources like that, digital PDF versions of the books. Be careful with PDFs and where you go, because PDFs can contain viruses. So just be careful when you are looking at different sources. So there's another source for you, is Internet Archive. Now, the next one is an interesting one. It's actually ChatGPT. AI. This is probably one of the worst and best sources that I've been using recently. It is a jumping off point. I cannot say this enough. The AI is going to be trained based upon all the different things that are out there on the internet, which means it's going to be pulling in all sorts of stuff. So when you're looking up keywords or concepts, you need to make sure you're asking and drilling it down. Talk to Chat GPT, get a topic going on, and then ask additional questions around it. Ask, why did he call it the magus? What's the oldest use of the word magus? Can you give me a reference for that? Then go through other resources, even I like using DuckDuckGo. You can use Google, doesn't really matter which search you use. Use a search engine to look up these different concepts, names, and words, and do additional validation on it. Don't just, hey, this is what it says, whatever. Find out and then go from there. Now, aside from these sources on these sites and kind of doing some digging, so I'm, again, just to reiterate, I'm doing online searches based upon Wikipedia, WikiWand, Britannica, Etymology, Internet Archive, as an example, ChatGPT, and then I'm doing different types of internet searches on DuckDuckGo, is typically the one that I like to go to. And then I'm trying to find names and then look up through Internet Archive or buying the books myself or getting a Kindle copy of it so that I can get highlighted notes and making notes in my book to continue. So now, how do you know which books to start with and which ones are good? That's when you need to start going into, my opinion, to kind of some of these experts out there. I have had suggested reading lists that I have found online, like what are some old books on magic, or I will look up different individuals who do YouTube channels or who do different types of classes or instructions through the internet, and then I look up their credentials, and then I use that information to kind of inform ideas to start looking into. What books, what reading lists, what things to buy, because these individuals who have doctorate degrees or PhDs potentially, or just individuals who are educated in their field, fellow lay scholars, what to buy to start reading off of. So let's get into some of those now. So the first person on my list has a doctorate degree, and that's Dr. Jackson Crawford. I have many of his books. He's an Old Norse specialist, so what he does is he works with language. He doesn't try to share spirituality or how to practice. Instead, he takes old sources, translates them in English, and gives his interpretation on his translations. This is a great resource. The reason I like Dr. Jackson Crawford so much is he takes out personal opinion and just gives you pure story, pure resource. So if you are interested in some of the Scandinavian Reconstruction Revival stuff, going to something that Jackson Crawford translated is going to give you the original pure source, the best that he can based upon his skills, versus just trusting somebody who's translated and added in their own interpretation and hearsay. Now, he does have a YouTube channel, so of course I'll link that below. He has several videos that are fantastic. If I scroll down, just looking through some of these, you can see some of the topics that are going on here. He talks about his opinion on other sources. He has collaborated with other creators, and I'll mention some of these creators because I actually like some of them. So he can give you suggestions on other experts to look up. He'll talk about particular artifacts and stones that are out there so you can go research them on your own. So again, looking at someone like this who's a expert in his field and him sharing resources, like he's going to share where he's getting this stuff from. So he's going to say, this is my translation of this historical document. Or I looked at this exact stone and this is another expert that I've spoken with. Now you have another person to research and look up. Now you have original sources and documents to go by, and you have different things that you can start researching, like around the stones or the finds that he has. So again, great channel, great website, highly recommend him. Next person on the list doesn't have his own YouTube channel or anything like that, but he has a lot of books, and I own many of his books, and that's Professor Ronald Hutton. Professor Ronald Hutton is going to be on anything dealing with like European folk traditions. So he's written books on the Druids, and I own his book on the Druids. He's written stuff about witches and witchcraft, and he's talked about a lot of the occult practices that have gone through Europe. And again, he has a professor degree, so he's a professor. Having that information and knowing that he's accredited through different schools and then reading a lot of his research, fantastic stuff. Highly recommend Ronald Hutton. And many of the individuals that I trust, that I find are reputable sources, recommend his writings. So again, he's written a lot of different books. Definitely check them out. Worth looking into. And there are interviews with him on YouTube. So even though it's not his own channel, you can actually hear him talking about different stuff. Yeah, check it out. Awesome stuff. Ronald Hutton. Next one, there's a website called Herstwick. And in fact, let me see, I'll drag this over for a second. That right there is William R. Short. William R. Short, I believe he actually is Dr. William R. Short. I think he has a doctorate degree too. He has a website. He has a book called Men of Terror, which I own. Fantastic book. I've actually spoken with him. He's one of the few that I've had an opportunity to speak with directly. He's very responsive, awesome guy. He does share different opinions, but mostly he goes to the original sources themselves, and he seems to be a big proponent of read the original sources, make up your own mind. Here it all is for you. Here's proof, here's evidence, here's documentation, here's articles, here's relics. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And he's backing it up. He's showing the receipts. Again, something that I admire, and anyone that I look for to trust as a source is someone who's going to have receipts. And his channel on YouTube, there's a Herstwick channel, has all sorts of talks. They have talks around some of the spiritualities. They talk with other experts as well. They talk about bowls they found. Like apparently they found a blot bowl in Iceland that actually has blood in it. So it's fascinating. They talk about some of the cultural traditions that are still alive or have adapted, or their opinions on them. They look at archaeology stuff. They look at sagas. They actually try to recreate some of the combat that they might have done based upon what they're reading in the story. So again, he's telling you he's reinventing this combat system, but he's basing it upon these old records. This is what they think. And they're looking at old weapons. They're looking at old swords and what's left of the shields and axes and whatnot, and they're trying to figure out, okay, this is what they said they did in this story, and this is what they have historically, archaeology speaking wise, these relics, so this is how they might have used them. And then they experiment and test it and pressure test it and see what seems to be effective. But they don't just do the combat stuff. They also, like I said, do some of the spiritual stuff, and they do some talks. So there's a lot of really good talks on here, and a lot of things that kind of dig into different type of, again, Scandinavia, you can call it Norse paganism, heathenry, whatever you want to call it, as part of the revival reconstruction. They've got some good resources on there as well. The next one has been somebody who I'd seen years ago, and I just didn't stick with her channel. But recently, she's been recommended by a channel that I'm a huge fan of, and I'm just like, okay, let's check these out. And that is Dr. Angela Puca. So her stuff is focused. So she has a doctorate degree. She has peer-reviewed papers. She has a website. She has a YouTube channel. And she talks basically about everything dealing with like spirituality and like paganism and stuff. And she's doing what I've been attempting to do, just more effectively because she knows what she's doing. And she's giving resources and references. And some of her videos has what inspired me to look at other stuff. Like I've had the Sworn Book of Honorius on my list of eventually books to read. Good sources. She shares where they come from. She gives links. And she, again, has receipts. Sharing receipts and sharing where things are coming from so you can do additional research on your own, I think is critical for any type of content creator. So she's one of those individuals like Dr. Jackson Crawford. Dr. Angela Puca takes the time to give free information. And both of them have a Patreon that if you pay into their Patreon, you get access to exclusive stuff. I haven't done that. I would like to do that eventually, but they both have some really, really good stuff. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, Sworn Book of Honorius right here. I think that's the one. That's the video right here that inspired me. Like, oh, maybe I should read that book after the Magus. So kind of cool stuff. Next one is one I'm a huge fan of, and that's Religion for Breakfast. So when I started watching, and this is run by an individual by the name of Dr. Andrew Henry, I had no idea who he was, but I loved his content. And I'm like, wow, this stuff is well researched. It gives you great information. It gives you, again, more stuff to look through. I don't always agree with his conclusions, but he kind of presents, this is the cold hard evidence. Here's sources. And then this is, and he gives a little bit of an opinion, but he makes it clear if one of those is an opinion. Based upon all this is one of the things that he's thinking of. Recently, I tried to do a live where I was reviewing his New Age, his What Does New Age Mean on his channel, and it was such a great video. not only did it connect things that I've read elsewhere, so again, that confirmation with somebody who is an expert in their field, but it also gave me new information I had no idea about, which allowed me to do further research. I got new author names and do time periods and where New Age had originally interjected itself into the cultures, specifically in the United States when we had like the hippies and stuff. So it's like, okay, all right, this is giving me additional resources. And I've been watching him, like I said, for years. Great channel, very non-biased, just information. And the fact that he's working with Dr. Angela Puca, and they'll go back and forth between their YouTube channels and recommend each other because they're colleagues and they support each other. And he acknowledges that he's not an expert in all things occult and arcane and like neo-paganism, but his colleague, Dr. Angela, is. So the fact that he's not trying to claim expertise where he's not an expert, that is commendable in itself. So many people want to present themselves as the go-to expert, and the fact that he's willing to acknowledge and call that out is just fantastic. So again, sources. Next one here is Arith Härger. Now, as far as Arith Härger goes, he's an archaeologist. So he's an independent researcher and archaeologist. A lot of the stuff that he has seems to be focused around interpretation and the way that he sees it, but based upon what he's researching and what he's figuring out through archaeology. And he gives receipts. At the end, he gives a list of the resources that he used. He's citing his sources, which is why I appreciate him. Citing your sources to me is so critical. Kris Hughes. Not only does she do classes, I keep debating on doing one of her classes. She does several classes with homework, with Zoom sessions, and it's interactive. And the fact that she has all of this done and it's around resources, right? She's taking these Irish Celtic type resources, Welsh resources, and reading the stories with you and having you read them on your own. And then you come to class and you interact, you ask questions. It's an actual class around it. That's freaking fantastic. And you buy the class you want, and it's several sessions, not just one. She also has a YouTube channel where she basically gives this information and shows people not only the original resource, but an interpretation and an impression and opinion. And she gives where it came from. She gives the receipts. In fact, I've bought many books based upon watching her YouTube videos. I've watched several videos. I've interacted with her. She's responsive. She'll actually answer questions, interact with you, which again is always nice. Some of the YouTubers get so big, it's so hard for them to keep up. There's just too many people pinging them. So the fact that Kris Hughes will actually take the time to respond to you is awesome. So if you want someone to not only, here you go, the best Celtic mythology books. I watched this, took down some of the names. Some of them I had, some of them I didn't, so I went out and bought them. It's good stuff. You know, it's good free information that's available, and she has Patreon as well. And I think she has some exclusive stuff behind Patreon. If she does not, she at least has the classes that if you want to deep dive certain topics. And these are live classes, not pre-recorded. So either way, great resource as well. So there you go. I know that was a little bit of a longer video, and a lot of that focused on talking about different resources as far as individuals who I personally consider to be reputable sources. But I think that's kind of important. I want you to know who else I'm looking at, what else I'm watching, and sometimes you're going to see some inspiration in some of my videos from those who've inspired me, and I try to call them out. I'll mention like, hey, this is a particular topic. I watched this video by this particular creator, and I'll put a link below, because if that's what inspired me, I want you to be able to go to that source. If the source is a person, go to that person. If the source is a book, I want to show you that book. Article, give you a link to the article. I think that's important for these conversations, is to share your receipts, and I wish more people did that. I don't think there's a problem, and I can't say this enough. I don't think there's necessarily a problem with individuals making their own path, doing this new age, eclectic, whatever they feel is right, picking and choosing. That's perfectly fine. The issue that I've had, and this has been repeated in multiple videos, and I'll repeat it in multiple future videos, the issue I have is when you try to claim it as original stuff. When you make your own thing, and then you try to teach new people that this is what it is without the disclaimer of this is how I do this. I think that's dishonest. I think it's manipulative, and I think it's a disservice to the community. Even if it's not intentional, that is what it ends up doing. And I say this because I have spent so much time. I was recently talking to my younger brother, and he actually thought, wow, he's like, I do not believe in any of this stuff anymore at all. I mean, I was like, I do, but I'm trying to find original sources. It's not that I'm saying it's wrong. I just want to know where it comes from, and I don't want to keep hearing people repeat false and misinformation. And I tried to compare it to Shaolin or karate. If you're practicing martial arts, a lot of people back in the 80s slapped the name Shaolin or karate on it, even though they weren't teaching you anything to do with Shaolin Kung Fu or karate or anything like that. It was just any martial art they wanted, and they labeled it with a name people knew as a marketing scheme to sell it. You go to a local cult shop, many of the times, a lot of the stuff that you're buying there is labeled to be able to mark it up. And in many cases, it's mislabeled. That's the point that I'm trying to get at, is I want to know the authentic truth. And I also don't want to be like, with an example, Shaolin, right? So I'm going to teach you Shaolin Kung Fu, and you're basically just learning karate or taekwondo or, you know, some sort of self-defense type of a thing, and it's not even practical. It's not pressure tested. They don't teach you about distancing and timing, or they have you learn it out of a book, but they're going to slap that name on it to sell it. Now people are practicing something they think is going to work and be effective, when in fact it's hollow and empty, and it doesn't have the ability to be used in a confrontational situation. It doesn't teach you the techniques necessary to survive an encounter on the streets. Same thing can be said for a lot of the spiritual stuff. When people keep slapping the label witch and witchcraft, or this is Norse paganism, even though it's witchcraft repackaged, or at least what witchcraft is, modern witchcraft repackaged, it causes confusion. Then you have these people arguing, saying, this is how you're supposed to worship the deities, and this is exactly how you make up the altar, and this is how you cast a circle and call the corners. And when you're summoning Odin, or you can pick whatever deity you want. And it's like, no, that's one way of doing a practice. And these are the cultures that did this. This is why they're doing it. That's what I'm interested in. I'm not saying don't do an altar. I'm not saying don't cast a circle. But don't tell everyone that this is the way that you become a particular practitioner, because this is the only way to practice it, because that's how you learned how to do it. So that's what I'm getting at. I don't want to talk in circles. I think this video has been long enough. Again, I'm trying to do more of these vlogs, talk about what's on my mind, and then share, again, resources and information. So hopefully this was helpful and you enjoyed it. As always, the best way to support my work is to interact with my videos. Thumb them up, comment below, share your thoughts, ask your questions, and I will catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.